Happy Monday, my littles. I hope you all had a great weekend and you had plenty of time to relax and ready to start another week of e-learning and ready to get started. Just a couple reminders before we do our read aloud. This week in vocabulary, we're going to be working on adverbs. Make sure that you log in on Monday and start working on those 6 lessons that you're assigned. Don't try to do them all in one day. Start early so you can learn the new vocabulary words, and then you can finish the week by doing your quiz and lyric lab on your last day of working. If you try to do them all in one day, then you don't give yourself an opportunity to actually learn the new vocabulary words that we're looking at. In math, we're going to once again have some review of working on angle measurements. This is another unit that we have done together in class, so you should have your math notebook to utilize as an extra reference to be able to look at the different lessons and what we're expected to do. In FSW, we're moving on to week 17. Our week looks similar to what it did last week. Monday and Wednesday, you'll be working on gathering information to put together a study guide type of notes for yourself. Remember, the most important thing is to read the articles carefully, gather as much information as you can, because on Friday it will be an open note test on the Studies Weekly website. So make sure that you're giving yourself enough information that you can find those different resources that will help you. iReady, once again, we're going to be completing those 2 iReady reading lessons. Make sure you also start early so you can work on those little by little, and then that way you can get those finished as soon as you can. Epic Reading, please make sure you're reading 30 minutes on Monday and Wednesdays, and then you're coming back after you're done reading to go ahead and write your response. Once you've written your response according to the prompt, you are asked to write a glow and a grow for 2 separate people. Please remember to do that for 2 people. If they haven't responded yet, then wait, come back until someone has an opportunity to actually write their own so you have them to respond to. Then our last thing is our class meetings. I love seeing all of your happy faces there. Make sure that you're making every opportunity to try to come and join us, because it's our time to try to grow as a class family. We talk about things that might be happening in our everyday life, but it's our chance to reconnect. If you haven't had a chance to come, or you haven't had a chance to come every day, try to do that this week. I'll be reaching out to those that are not attending because we'll set up an individual class kind of meeting between the 2 of us, because I want to check in on you as well. So if you have not come to class meetings, try. If not, then you and I will try to set up something on our own. All right, today we're going to read a book called Henry's Freedom Box. Henry's Freedom Box is about our young Henry Box Brown, who we read about last week in our social studies. So I thought, what an appropriate book for us to read together today. So it's called Henry's Freedom Box. Henry Brown wasn't sure how old he was. Henry was a slave, and slaves weren't allowed to know birthdays. Henry and his brothers and sisters worked in the big house where the master lived. Henry's master had been good to Henry and his family, but Henry's mother knew things could change. Do you see those leaves blown in the wind? They are torn from the trees like slave children are torn from their families. One morning, the master called for Henry and his mother. They climbed the wide staircase. The master lay in bed with only his head above the quilt. He was very ill. He beckoned them to come closer. Some slaves were freed by their owners. Henry's heart beat fast. Maybe the master would set him free. But the master said, "You are a good worker, Henry. I am giving you to my son. You must obey him and never tell a lie." Henry nodded, but he didn't say thank you. That would have been a lie. Later that day, Henry watched a bird soar high above the trees. Free bird, happy bird, Henry thought. Henry said goodbye to his family. He looked across the field. The leaves swirled in the wind. Henry worked in his new master's factory. He was good at his job. "Do not tear that tobacco leaf," the boss yelled at the new boy. He poked the boy with a stick. "If you make a mistake, the boss will beat you." Henry was lonely. One day he met Nancy, who was shopping for his mistress. They walked and talked and agreed to meet again. Henry felt like singing, but slaves didn't dare sing in the streets. Instead, he hummed all the way home. Months later, Henry asked Nancy to be his wife. When both their masters agreed, Henry and Nancy were married. Soon there was a little baby, and then another and another. Henry knew they were very lucky. They lived together even though they had different masters. But Nancy was worried. Her master had lost a great deal of money. "I'm afraid he will sell our children," she said. Henry sat very still. Henry worked hard all morning. He tried to forget what Nancy had said. His friend James came into the factory. He whispered to Henry, "Your wife and children were just sold at the slave market." "No!" cried Henry. Henry couldn't move. He couldn't think. He couldn't work. "Twist that tobacco," the boss poked Henry. Henry twisted tobacco leaves. His heart twisted in his chest. At lunchtime, Henry rushed to the center of town. A large group of slaves was tied together. The owner shouted at them. Henry looked for his family. "Father! Father!" Henry watched his children disappear down the road. Where was Nancy? He saw her the same moment she saw him. When he whipped around his tears, Nancy too was gone. Henry no longer sang. He couldn't hum. He went to work, and at night he ate supper and went to bed. Henry tried to think of happy times, but all he could see were the carts carrying away everyone he loved. Henry knew he would never see his family again. Many weeks passed. One morning, Henry heard singing. A little bird flew out of a tree into the open sky, and Henry thought about being free. But how? As he lifted a crate, he knew the answer. He asked James and Dr. Smith to help him. Dr. Smith was a white man who thought slavery was wrong. They met early the next day at an empty warehouse. Henry arrived with a box. "I will mail myself to a place where there are no slaves," he said. James stared at the box and then at Henry. "What if you cough and someone hears you?" "I will cover my mouth and hope," Henry said. Dr. Smith wrote on the box, "To William H. Johnson, Ark Street, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania." Henry would be delivered to friends in Philadelphia. Then he printed on the crate in big letters, "This side up with care." Henry needed an excuse to stay home where the work boss would think he had run off. James pointed at Henry's sore finger, but Henry knew it wasn't bad enough. He opened a bottle of oil, of vitriol. "No!" cried James. Henry poured it on his hand. It burned his skin to the bone. Now the boss would have to let him stay home. Dr. Smith bandaged Henry's hand. They arranged to meet the next morning at 4 o'clock. The sun was not yet up when Henry climbed into the box. "Ready," he said. James nailed down the lid. Dr. Smith and James drove to the station. The railway clerk tipped the box over and nailed the paper to the bottom. Dr. Smith begged the clerks to be careful, but they didn't listen. They threw the box into the baggage car. Hours passed. Henry was lifted up and thrown again, upside down. He heard waves splashing. This must be the steamboat headed for Washington, D.C. The ship rode smoothly, but Henry was still upside down. Blood rushed to his head. His face got hot. His eyes ached. He thought his head would burst, but he was afraid to move. Someone might hear him. "I'm tired of standing," someone said. "Why don't we move that box and sit on it?" said another. Henry held his breath. Could they be talking about his box? Henry was pushed. The box scraped the deck. Now he was on his right side, now on his left, and suddenly right side up. "What do you think is in here?" said the first man. "Mail, I guess," said the other. "I am mail," thought Henry, but not that kind they imagined. Henry was carried off the steamboat and placed in a railroad car, this time head up. He fell asleep to the rattling song of the train wheels. He awoke to loud knocking. "Henry, are you all right in there?" "All right," he answered. The cover was pried open. Henry stretched and stood up. 4 men smiled at him. "Welcome to Philadelphia." At last Henry had a birthday, March 30th, 1849, his first day of freedom. And from that day on, he